drinking the Kool-Aid. My sons have finally convinced me that the car is riding too high and it needs to be lowered. So I have on stock suspension the Ebach Pro Line spring kit, but I'm hoping to get it a little bit lower, maybe an inch and a half. And to accomplish that, I'm going to go with these used Ebach Sport lines, which I don't think these are made anymore, but I do think these allow the car to ride a little lower. So we're going to do that and see how worth it this Kool-Aid is. All right, we're going to grab a starting point here, and I'm running 245 40s on 17-inch wheels, and on the back it looks like we're just shy of 25 inches, and on the front looks like we are at 24 3/4, maybe a tad more. And on the front, of course, we're running 205 40s on 17-inch wheels. Let's see if we can get any lower than these two dimensions. All right, here we go. Starting the project of lowering the car a little bit, hopefully lowering the car a little bit. I've decided to just go all the way and actually truly upgrade the suspension. And I've driven the cars with both coilovers and stock suspension on lowering springs. And I feel like stock suspension with lowering springs is a better ride, and just more options for fitment with wheels, etc. So that's what I'm doing again, but this time with the Sport Line springs. I'm going to be adding these Coney yellows, and going to have some adjustment, and apparently these ride great, so I'm super excited to see how they do. These are shocks from a different car, a different MR2, and normally I would be planning to paint these like I do, but we're just going to leave these black. They're fine. And we'll be removing the springs, of course, servicing the rotating parts, the bearings up here, and we will need to be cutting little notches so that the hoses can slip in and get clipped in. So those are the steps. Also going to be using this cheap eBay spring compressor, which works just fine, and get this thing lowered. Right, so as expected, these top hat bearings pretty much seized, at least by hand. I can't turn the bearing. When they were connected, they would spin, but very grimy in there, so we're gonna let it soak with some parts cleaner for a bit and blow that out, put some solvent in there like WD-40 or an equivalent for a while and blow that out, and then I will actually pack it with some grease, some waterproof grease that I like to use, and these hopefully will have complete restored function. So that's the next step. All right, so I'm super happy with how these turned out. And between each step, I got rid of all the product that I had been spraying in with compressed air so it'd be clean and so that the solvents and greases wouldn't mix with each other. But this is a clean one that now spins great. And it is solvent and grease free at this point. And after packing the grease in, it's smooth, has a little bit more drag. Obviously these don't rotate. I would assume that at most they might turn a degree or two. So the grease is more for smoothness and so that it doesn't rust and bind up long term. So, happy with that. These are ready to go back on, restored, and will probably last another 30 years. Who knows? All right, next is the step to grind an opening into the mounting bracket for the brake line. Sweet. So that's how that ended up. And we'll go on to the other three. The process of removing the insert from all the struts is the same. And I found a couple things. First, definitely douse it in penetrating fluid to start breaking this free. And then putting it in the vise in an inverted way is better than sideways. You get more leverage on it to spin it. It is a lot easier on the rears because the fronts have the bigger base and it gets hung up on the vise when you're trying to twist it, but you just have to do it incrementally. Also, because it will spew oil out, it's kind of handy to tie a rag to it. Socket extension. And it just breaks free. Eventually. Or it pulls out of the vise. Oh yeah, there we go. Yeah, certainly a mess. That's that. Everything is disassembled now and prepped, so we've turned a corner and now we're going to start reassembling. And before doing that, there are a couple things to note. It's kind of interesting to me, and I don't really understand spring rates and all that, but these are supposed to lower the car, but they are actually taller as they sit unsprung. So anyway, assume it's going to end up being lower even though they're taller. The other thing is that the bump stops, I'm actually going to cut this off. The stock bump stops are built into the boot, obviously, but they are about that high, I guess about 2 inches. And apparently what needs to happen is the replacement bump stops need to be equally lowered as the car is being lowered. So if the car is going to end up being lowered an inch, then the bump stop should be roughly an inch shorter. One thing to keep in mind though is stock suspension on a 91 is actually an inch taller than stock suspension on a 93. So 93 and above already have a little bit lower springs and a little bit lower ride height by about 1 inch. So when those calculations come into play, the model year also comes into play. So theoretically, these, which drop about an inch or an inch and a half, are going to be dropping the 91 by 2 inches or so. So again, we're going to see how that plays out when we take that final measurement. The new boots come with new bump stops. They seem to be basically the same height, but I am going to cut some of that off as I install it back in. The process of reassembly is all about getting things in the right order so that you only have to do it once, and also a matter of alignment, and I'll touch on that here in a second. First of all, we need to put some fluid, some oil of some kind down in the strut. I'm just using power steering fluid, and the volume is about an inch. Basically, you don't want it to overflow when you put the insert in. And of course, you can always test it. You want to see a little bit of the fluid in there, and I can't really see any, so I'm gonna add just a tad. The purpose of the fluid, from what I understand, is to just control heat a little bit as the shocks are cycling. My guess is also so it doesn't get bound up inside over time and possibly even dampen some rattling. But either way, it's a necessary step. And that time I put too much in. Great, all right. Next thing, the nut that holds it down, I don't have the spanner wrench that this is made for or requires to get it tight, at least not one that I could get some purchase on to get it as tight as it needs to be. So I just ground down 2 flat sides on it so I could put it in the vise and really get it tight. And that's the way it's gonna be. So I just tighten that down. Next, little spacer that's included. Okay, next thing. These bumpers that I cut down, I didn't realize that the part I cut off is the smaller diameter that actually holds it in place. But the bottom part is the part that snaps in to the boot to hold it in place. So they say these can be trimmed, but both ends are necessary. So that's trash now. So what I've decided to do, I took the bump stop from the front, which of course the boots are all torn off. These are about the height of the cut down one, so it should be about right. And I'm inverting the boot, and I'm shoving this, kind of just locks in place. So now I have a boot and a bump stop that's going to hold itself in place. It needs to be held kind of at the top, and then at the bottom it still fits over nicely. So that's that. Next, it's best to go ahead and compress the spring, because the next step is probably the most challenging one. The next step is the most challenging one because we have to line everything to interface with the key at the top, on the top half. So there are flat spots on the insert, on the shaft here, They need to fit squarely into here, and it's very easy to miss that and have them not line up and interface and lock in. So the outside of the shock, of course, is where the knuckle bolts in. So this bracket here is going to be facing outwards. So what we want to do is align the two tabs here in line with the bottom of the strut, and hopefully it'll stay in line. The top hat has 3 bolts. One is not symmetrical with the other two, so it's the one that faces the outside. So the one that's furthest away faces the outside, so we're going to line it up with the holes on the bottom and the flat spots on the insert. Hopefully, if we've compressed the spring enough, we can go ahead and push it down and have it interface. All right, so that's snapped in. It's aligned, it's seated. Remember the spacer? And I would not use the impact at this point, because if you're using the nylock nut with the nylon spacer in it, it's going to grab the whole thing and spin it and possibly pull it out. And I'm going to be pushing down on this so it doesn't come out. Great. So it's seated. Make sure this bolt is lined up before the springs are let loose. We'll do a final tightening once the springs are loose. And with that, we're ready for install. So on to the next step. All right, moment of truth to see what we accomplished, at least in the rear. I'm gonna lower it down, see if it actually got lower. Well, we're pretty much at 24.5 inches, so it's all right, I guess. Now these springs will settle, so it might actually take a couple days, and I'll take another measurement, and also once the fronts are done too, so it'll be level, and give the final report. So the fronts go together a little bit more easily than the back ones. Same basic process though, and that's really just a matter of alignment. Getting these two flat tabs in line with the mounting bracket here, the spring and its little perch catch there. A little bit big up here, but that's okay. Ends up being a little floppy, but doesn't seem like it's going to be a problem. Well, I'm actually going to go with the cut bump stops for the front, because I don't really have another option to lower the bump stop and not do it this way. So I'm using the part that snaps into the boot and does not have the smaller diameter inside to stay tight on the shaft. So it's going to rattle around, bounce around a little, but I think it'll be fine. This does say out, so obviously we're going to align it with the little tabs and the mounting bracket, at least close to it. With these, we have a little bit of wiggle room once it's getting tightened down. So basically just what I'm doing is getting that nut just snug down a little bit. It's easy to compress the springs by hand and get that purchased, and then it's also easy to glance underneath and see the alignment. And the trick here is once it's getting close, you do have to push down and get the two little flat sections to seat in before it's tightened down. Otherwise, the wrench just starts spinning the strut. That felt like it bit in. Great. So that pulled itself right into the little slot there. There we go. Ready to slide them in. All right, so putting the shocks back in is pretty straightforward, pretty easy, but there are a couple things to just keep in mind. Install the end links first, because you can't really slide them in once they're under the car. Also, the little top hat here is offset, and the little indentation faces the rear of the car. So it will go like this with the indentation facing back. And the other thing I didn't realize, because I'm swapping these struts between different cars, that this one doesn't have the little bracket for the ABS line. So I guess I'm just gonna have to zip tie that, but didn't really realize that until now. But here we go. All right, now to find out if we've beaten our low score. Gonna let it down and see where we're at. It looks lower. $23 3/4. All right. Looks pretty good, I guess. I'm happy with that. Not too low, but definitely looks a little bit more aggressive. So, sweet.